Hello, everyone. My name is Sharzad. Welcome back to Not My Circle. Today's guest is Salina Pierce. She is a mom of two and a young widow. She lost her husband unexpectedly just about a year and a half ago, and she shares the story of what happened that day and how her life has been since. I know you guys are going to get some really, really great takeaways from this episode. She is a beautiful, strong woman, and I loved listening to her and getting to know her. You can also connect with her on Instagram. You can find her handle here. So please enjoy this conversation with Salina. I know this is a heavier subject, but we can try and have as much fun with it as possible. Yay, death!
That's how my approach has been.
Good. So let's start with something really fun and easy. Well, first of all, Salina, I'm so honored that you're here to chat with us on a Saturday. I know you're a mama. Your kids, I think, are similar ages to mine, like 6 and 4?
Yep. Mm-hmm. 6 and 4. Yep. I have a son and a daughter, so nice. They're hanging out with grandma and grandpa. They love that.
Awesome. So I appreciate your time. And yeah, I'm really excited that you're here. So let's start with something fun. One of my favorite subjects, food. What'd you eat for breakfast today?
Well, that's funny. When you were sending over some of the questions, I'm like, oh, I don't really eat breakfast. But today I was really hungry. So I actually had cold leftover pizza.
Hey,
that's like my favorite thing to eat. It's just, so while the kids were eating their cereal, I was like snacking in the corner with my pizza.
I like that. That reminds me of like waking up in a frat house drunk and like walking around and finding pizza, like probably on the floor. So you probably did it a classier way, but
I mean, I was hiding in a corner, so I'm not sure how much classier.
So you're a widow.
Yes.
Let's talk about that. When did your husband pass, and what has your journey been like?
Sure. Do you want me to tell you the whole story of how he passed, or it was very suddenly?
Whatever you feel comfortable with.
Okay. I kind of started on Instagram. My story is kind of out there, but my daughter, her birthday is August 23rd. So back in 2019, she was turning 3, which was, her birthday was on a Friday, and we spend the day for the kid's birthday just doing whatever they want. So we asked her what she wanted to do. She wanted to go get pancakes and with her grandparents, and then she wanted to go to the Children's Museum. So we said, okay, that's our day. So we did that day. It was a fantastic day. The weather was perfect. Everybody was behaving. I remember driving down to the Children's Museum, and Taylor Swift had just released her Lover album, and he always would make fun of me for my musical taste, and he's kind of a music snob. And so I remember telling him like, oh, Taylor Swift got us a birthday present for Maddie, and he just looked at me and like rolled his eyes. So he let us listen to the whole Taylor Swift album that day, and we came home. We had a small little birthday party for her. And then the next day, which is August 24th, we were going to have her big birthday party with like all of her friends and her cousins. And so that morning, we spent the morning in bed before the kids woke up, which never happened. We kind of just were talking and like hugging and snuggling, which I'm sure, as you know, as a parent, like those times don't happen very often. So I had to go run some errands. And so I went to go run errands. We had the morning to ourselves. We went to go bike riding before her birthday party, and he decided to go running. And he was kind of active, but he wasn't like a runner. He was just more starting to get active. So I remember he was kind of ahead of us. And I just remember thinking like, oh my God, if he falls, like if he has a heart attack, like if we're turning the corner, like what do I do? I'm a nurse. So like I'm always thinking like, what happens? What am I going to do if something happens? And so I just was like, that's a really weird thought to have, Salina. I've never really had those thoughts before. So I kind of like put them aside. We came back home, showered, got ready for her birthday party. And it was at a local like gymnastics place. And so we were all like doing stuff. I was on like the uneven bars on them. I was like dangling like a little 2-year-old. And he came up to me and just said he wasn't feeling good. And I was like, well, you haven't eaten all day. It's 5:00. You exercise, you barely drink any water. Maybe you're dehydrated or your sugar's low or something. So he was like, okay. He's like, but I think I'm going to go outside and get some fresh air. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll go with you, because something told me to go with him. And so I remember following him outside, and I just remember thinking like, I should call 911. And so I told him, I said, I'm going to call 911. And he did not argue with me. And he was very much a person who did not want to cause a ruckus, especially at our daughter's birthday party. Like, even if we were at home with nobody around, he wouldn't have allowed me to call 911. So the fact that he let me do that was kind of alarming in itself. So I called my cousin out there with me because she's also a nurse. So we were kind of doing like a basic little triage on him, and his heart rate was really high. And so finally the ambulance came, and his blood pressure was a little low, and his EKG, his heart looked okay. So they were like, oh, we'll just take him to the hospital for some fluids. We're not going to use the sirens. We're just going to follow us if you can. So thinking everything would be fine, I just told my parents and my family, like, okay, continue the party. We'll meet you guys later for, presents at home or whatever, just whatever. And my kids spend a lot of time with my parents, so they're very comfortable with them. And so I followed behind the ambulance by myself, and halfway to the hospital, they turned on the sirens. And so they told me before, they said, if we do turn on the sirens, don't follow us, just drive safely. Well, when they turned on the sirens, I immediately, like, my heart sank, because I did ER for a little bit, and I did trauma ICU. I've done several types of nursing. So I knew just by that alone that something had happened. So I didn't listen to them. I put my flashers on and I followed behind them. And I remember pulling into the parking lot of the hospital and like just parking in like, I don't even think it was a parking spot. I think I just like slid in and I ran to the ambulance bay. I parked where I could see the ambulance. I ran over there and I remember seeing him awake. And so I was like, okay, well, it can't be that bad. And I asked the paramedic, I said, what happened? Did he have an EKG change? And he just looked at me. I said, was it a STEMI, which is one of the more serious heart attacks? And he just looked at me and kind of nodded. And I was like, okay. I was shaking. I was like, as a nurse, you kind of know, like your brain is prepared for that. But as like a wife, like I was not prepared to hear that. And I like knew too much about those type of situations. So I remember them getting him into the little trauma bay and they were doing his vital signs. I was trying to answer the doctor's questions. And I just remember looking at the monitor as they were connecting. And I remember seeing his rhythm change and like my heart stopped. And I remember looking at the nurse and he just like immediately, he popped into like, what he was supposed to be doing. And they were starting CPR and I just could not stay in there. I had to step out. I called his mom or his stepmom and I asked her, I told her what was going on because in my mind, the worst case scenario was that he was going to have to have open heart surgery and possibly need like some cardiac rehab, and I would need some help with my kids or something like that, or they would want to come down. But I remember telling her not to tell his dad because he has heart issues as well, and I didn't want him to get worked up because they were in Ohio and we're in Texas, so I didn't want them to get worked up when we didn't know anything. So they were doing that. They finally were able to bring him back. And I remember going in there and I remember looking at him and we used to always do the sign language sign for I love you. And I remember, and we used to always just do it on your hand or your shoulder. So I remember doing that on his arm and looking at him. And I remember laughing, like, you're not allowed to do that anymore. And he was like, I don't know what happened. Like, what did I do? And I was like, okay. And he started getting a little like emotional and worked up. And I said, okay, I'm going to step outside and let the doctors work on you and get you where you needed to go. So I'm just right outside. I'll be here. And I am a twin. And so my sister was 9 months pregnant. She was due to have her baby, a C-section, the week after. So like August 31st, she was scheduled to have her C-section, and nobody at this point has any idea that any of this is going on. So my phone's blowing up. I asked the nurse to talk to her because I could not form words. Like at that point, I remember just shaking so much, like internally, like when you're cold and you just like shiver. And so I couldn't talk to anybody. And so I asked the nurse to explain to my sister, but in a very worked up way, because I didn't want her to have a baby because I couldn't deal with, everything going on. So she was great. And they, explained what was going on. So in the background of things, I guess, my family has been calling people and asking for prayers, and people started slowly making their way to the hospital. And by that time, they were able to get him to the cath lab, and they allowed me to walk with him upstairs to the cath lab. And so I remember in the elevator, just holding his hand. And he just, right before he went through the doors, he asked me, am I going to be okay? And I was like, of course you're going to be okay. Like, why wouldn't you be okay? And he's like, okay. And I was like, okay, I love you. And he went through the doors, and I started making phone calls and telling people what was going on. My brother-in-law got to the hospital at that point, and it was just the two of us while my sister was trying to settle everything down. And I remember them calling Code Blue cath lab. And so in my head, I'm thinking, well, that's not a big deal. But then I remember thinking, well, my husband's the only cath lab that they're doing right now. Like, they called them in specifically for him. And so I remember thinking, like, that's his second time he's coding. Like, that's not good. And then I didn't hear any more codes. And so I'm like, okay, well, that's one to two things. Like, I don't know what else I'm doing. And I remember just sitting in the waiting room. It was a very empty waiting room at that point. And my sister had, finally come up, and I was on the phone with one of my nurse friends trying to get numbers for different cardiologists, trying to plan for, what we're going to need, that sort of thing. And I remember the doctor coming out, and I was like, okay, I got to go now. And so I remember just looking at him, and I'm like, okay. And he just stood there shaking his head saying, I'm sorry. And I remember like falling to the floor, and I could not get up. And I remember I remember hearing a scream, and I was like, somebody's being incredibly loud and rude in this waiting room. And it was me. I was the one that was screaming. I was the one that was acting like a crazy person, basically. Pretty sure I don't know if I can swear, but I'm pretty sure I called
You aren't.
I'm pretty sure I called the doctor like a fucking asshole at one point. And they asked me if I wanted to see him, and I did. And my husband was a very charismatic person, very loud, life of the party type of guy. Like, anytime he was around, people wanted to be around him. And I just remember seeing him in the ICU bed with just like a tube coming out of his mouth and like nothing. And so seeing this person that's been a part of my life for 14 years, something like that, not being the life of the party and just like laying there was something that I'll never forget. And I remember even seeing him, like, I could not stand up. Like, I remember falling to the ground again. And I think even for like weeks afterwards, I had bruises all up and down my legs from like where I hit the floor. And we stayed there for a while. And I just remember telling like the nurse, like, what am I supposed to do? I have two kids. My daughter just turned 3. Like, what do I do? And she was, she just told me, just be honest with them. And so I was like, okay. And so, they were asleep when I got home, and I brought them to my bed, and I didn't sleep at all that night. I spent the night like Googling how to tell your kids that their dad was gone, or, and what do I do? What are the next steps? And thinking about my health insurance and like things that I would have to do. Like, I had this laundry list of things, and it was just earth shattering. I always explain it like, it's not like your heart's broken or your world's just broken. It's like obliterated. Like, the pieces just aren't going to go back together. Like, no matter what you do, it's going to be something completely different than what you thought it was going to be, something completely different than what you hoped it would be. So that's kind of our story. And the kids, I just basically told them, like, your dad's dead, and we are a Christian family. So, I told them that he's in heaven, and that, he's always with us and that sort of thing. And they actually took it okay. My daughter, I don't think at the time knew everything. And obviously it was her birthday party the next day, so she was excited to open presents and whatnot. And my son kind of just clinged to me that day and had his moments of like crying and asking questions, then asking for snack and crying. So that's kind of where I feel like my new life picked up. And I always kind of, when people ask, like, tell us about yourself, I would always start out with like, oh, I'm a nurse, I have 2 kids, blah, blah. And now I'm like, well, I'm a widow. Like, I feel like that's a pretty defining part of who I am now. And I don't use it to like, as like a sympathy or anything like that, but it just does to show like, I didn't think widows existed at my age. I mean, like, I know that's very naive to think, but like, in my personal world, like that just wasn't something that existed. And now it's me. I am the person that everybody knows as a young widow, and I'm okay with that now. So yeah, he died in August 24th, 2019, pretty unexpectedly. And that's kind of.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. I obviously got choked up. That's a tough thing to go through. And you are so well spoken. And I imagine you've had to tell a lot of people this story, and maybe you've figured out a way to say it without bursting into tears every single time. Since you were a nurse and you said you kind of had been, you knew how to, I don't know, you've probably experienced death before your husband being a nurse. How comfortable were you talking about death? Like, was it something you thought about a lot because of your job? Was it something you accepted as an everyday occurrence? Like, what was your relationship with death before this? Had it really affected you?
Absolutely. So I was in nursing school. I worked in a level 1, which is one of, like, if you're in serious car accidents or anything like that, like that's the hospital that you would go to. So I worked in nursing school as a tech in the ER of our local level 1, where I was going to school. And I saw death all the time there, especially car accidents. And you would see, the young people come in and whatnot. And so it was something that at that time I wasn't very comfortable with, but I learned how to deal with it. And then I transitioned to being a trauma ICU nurse for a while. And in that role, my husband and I were already married, and we were dating and engaged when I worked in the ER. But when I became like an actual nurse, those stories kind of affected me a little bit harder. We had one couple who had recently just gotten married, and she ended up in a car accident and was, not going to make it. And so I remember coming home and we would have long conversations about death. And I would tell him what my wishes would be, I didn't want to be buried. I wanted to be buried in pajamas and a sports bra. He knew what I wanted. And he, in turn, I knew what he would want. So it wasn't something I would say I was comfortable with, but I knew how to kind of internalize it. And he was my sounding board. So when I would come home, I would vent, and he was very funny. So he would usually try to relax and help me, find the lightheartedness of it. So it was something that I would say I was comfortable with, and we talked about quite a bit. And he would actually always tell me that he was afraid he was going to die young. He was like, I just have a feeling I'm going to die young. He always thought it was going to be by a drunk driver. And so he was very careful that if he was going to go out, he would only have so many drinks, and then he'd had a cutoff time, or he would take an Uber, or he would arrange for me to pick him up. He was very careful about that, because that is something that he was afraid would happen to him. So
it's so interesting that also, and that feeling you had the day that he passed away, and you thought heart attack, and that gives me chills. It's just, I don't know how to explain that. I don't know how to wrap my head around that, but it's you.
And I don't either. And I don't know if it's because his family had an extensive, heart, issues or whatever. So that was always kind of something that was in the back of my head, but it was never something that we talked about. We never thought to get him a cardiologist or anything like that. Now, obviously looking back, I wish we had, but I don't know if it was something that was internally, like I said, I'm a strong believer and a Christian. And so I do think that maybe I was, God was preparing me for something, just to kind of brace myself, because I don't know how I would have reacted otherwise if I hadn't known, if it was completely not even a thought in my head.
Yeah, I feel a lot of people are really uncomfortable talking about death, and a lot of people brush it aside as something that's just not going to happen or something. And Shereen, my sister, who's, obviously on here too, we lost our mom just a few months before you lost your husband, April 3rd, 2019. But she talked a lot about death with us before she got cancer, and then a lot when she was sick for that last year. And so we got really comfortable talking about death. And I think I was somebody who kind of shied away. I don't want to say shied away, but it made me uncomfortable. It made me sad to think about losing a loved one. Not that I was afraid to talk about it, but I just like didn't want to think about it. And then we were faced with losing her, who is such an important part of all of our lives. We were all really, really close with her. And it made me think about death constantly. And one thing I noticed for months after, and even a year after, people, not intentionally, but they would like feel sorry for me, or they would burst into tears when they saw me, and they didn't know what to say, and they didn't know what to do. And, it was just pure emotion coming out of them when they saw me, even if I was like in a great mood or something and wasn't even talking about my mom, and be a friend that I hadn't seen in a while who knew that my mom passed away, and they would see me and they would just start weeping. I imagine that happened to you? And I'm just curious as to how you dealt with that and still do deal with that.
I think initially I hated being treated like a fragile flower. And I've always kind of been like I am woman, hear me roar, roar type of person. Like, I don't like being babied, but like, I also kind of do. Like, if my dad now, helps me out a lot. And so like, if he sees me struggling to, like hang something high or with a nail thing or something I've never used before, he'll like, like, do you want me to do it? I'm like, no, I could do it. I've watched YouTube videos, like I got it. And so initially, like, it really bothered me that people were treating me like this little flower, that they were afraid to say anything around me, because that's not who I am. And I'm very, I guess I wasn't at the time, but now I'm very like vocal about my feelings and where I'm at. And so like, if something's bothering me, I'll let you know now. But back then I wasn't. So I think people were just they danced on eggshells around me, and it really bothered me. So I would tell them, like, you can talk about things, like, it doesn't bother me. And if it does, I'll let you know, or I'll leave the room. Like, don't be offended if I leave the room. So I think my family kind of had to get used to that. And they are much better about it now. Like, I have my sisters, she understands, like, if we're talking about something and I don't like it, I'll either say like, okay, I'm just going to scoot over here and hang out with so-and-so or whatever. And so nobody takes offense to it now, but I remember being bothered by it. And now it doesn't really bother me. I'm very open about everything, which is, the whole point of like my Instagram. I started it basically as a journal, not intending it to be anything more than that. And that's basically what it's still been. And so a lot of my family follow it on there, so they'll reach out to me. But I got a lot of messages initially up front, and people, I don't know if they felt sorry for me, but they just couldn't imagine that. I would get that a lot. Like, I can't imagine what you're going through. And I'm like, well, neither can I. Like, I don't believe this is my life. Like, I'm going to wake up and it's not going to be this way. Now I'm just like, yeah, well, this is where we're at.
I think it's really great that you're putting your story on the internet, because I think that I'm sure you've probably found other people going through something similar, and maybe you guys can, connect together. And
yeah. It's actually been really refreshing, because I remember it was a few weeks after he died. I remember like I was just completely hopeless. Like I was like, I'm the only person that's going through this. Like, there has to be somebody else. And so like I started with just searching the hashtag young widow. I'm like, there has to be something else. And so of course, like that kind of got me through a rabbit hole. And I was like, oh my God, there's so many people out there not so many, but there's people out there that know exactly what I'm feeling. And they would write these beautiful posts about what they were feeling. And I was like, that's me. I had that day yesterday. Like, oh my God. And so I found such relief and such hope from it that I was like, okay. And at that time I had been like actually writing in a journal. I sought therapy like pretty immediately afterwards. And so one of the things they recommended doing was writing in a journal, and they color coded it based on your feelings. So like blue would be on days that I was really sad. And so that way you can kind of look back and see like your happy and your sad days. And so that was something that was really helpful. And so I actually had switched from using my handwritten journal to like using Instagram, because it was just easier, and it was something that I could look back on, later with pictures and like actual memories and stuff. So I've found a lot of great things from it.
How do you celebrate your husband's legacy? Like, how do you connect with him even though he's not here? Do you have any things you do? Do you talk about him a lot, or? How does that work in your world? Like, how do you celebrate him or grieve him, or what does that look like for you?
So, I know people think like, oh, if she's happy, she's not thinking about him or thinking about it. But it is something that's like in my head 24/7, 365. It's not something that I ever forget that he's gone. And people just kind of think like, oh, if she's sad, she must, remember something. No, it's just, he's like, I wear his ring on my necklace every day. And even if I switch necklaces, like the ring is coming on my necklace. And this ring is actually his fingerprint. So this one I'm always wearing as well. So I'm always wearing something of his. And then we have blankets made with his t-shirts. We have a Build-A-Bear that has his voice on it. So he's kind of like embedded everywhere in this house. He was cremated, and so his ashes are on top of the TV. Not like because like I want him looking. It's just that was the only, I didn't want to put him in a closet. So I was like, well, he'll hang out here for a while until I'm ready to like put him somewhere else. But he's everywhere. Like, and there's the kids have their own blankets with his stuff on them, and they have pictures from the funeral. We have pictures with like boards with pictures all over them. So they each have one in their room, and they'll just say like, I need time to be by myself. And they'll go to their room and just sit and play in front of his pictures and whatever. So he's kind of always around. And I have a note in my phone, an ongoing note of like little things that he used to do, silly songs that he used to sing to the kids, or, just little, if something like pops into my head, I'll, make a note of it because I don't want to forget. I always tell people I have a terrible memory. And so my fear is that I'm going to forget I'm just going to forget him. So I always try to like look back at the note or look back at videos and pictures. And so, he's kind of just always with us. And the songs that I have on my phone are like songs that remind me of him. Not all of the songs, but, a song will come on. I'll be like, oh my God, I remember exactly where we were when we started listening to this, or, something like that. So I feel like he's kind of just always with me. There's not anything in particular that we've done aside from, we call the day he died his death day, because I don't like anniversary. I feel like anniversary should be something that's like happy. And, obviously the day he died is not something I want. It's not happy. So what we did this past year, it was his 1 year. We asked people to send us silly videos or pictures because he was just a huge goofball. And so that was something that I thought was amazing. And people were sending them to us all throughout the day. So I was able to show the kids, like, look at Uncle so-and-so dancing in like a taco suit or something like that. So he's just kind of always around us. If something silly happens, or my son loves fart jokes, so like he just gets a kick out of that.
And it's farting all the time. Yep.
I'm just like, oh, that's so your dad. Like, it's just silly things like that. So I don't know if there's any like one thing we've done. And I also think like COVID's kind of stopped us from being able to like actually do like something nice and big with a bunch of people. So I kind of feel cheated in that regard, but he's just kind of always with us. His legacy, I feel like, is the kids. They take after him a lot with his kindness, but also with his humor. They crack up at the most ridiculous things.
Awesome. So you obviously went from a 2-income household. I know you said you work, and I think you mentioned your husband worked in a similar industry as you.
No, he was a manager for like an insurance company. So we were very different.
But you had 2 incomes.
Yeah.
How do you survive going from 2 incomes down to 1 and being a single mom? I mean, what does that look like? Are there any programs to help widows financially? I mean, I know you mentioned your family being around to help here and there or whenever they help, but how does that work?
Well, that was one of the things that I cried about initially, because I'm like, how am I supposed to do this? Because he had the better health insurance, and he had, a retirement fund. He thought about that sort of things. I didn't. I was very much, okay, I paid the day-to-day bills, like our mortgage. He did all of our like long-term planning, like retirement and savings and stuff like that. So and I will say this to a million people, get a will. Like we always talked about doing it, but we never did it because we were in our 30s. We didn't think we were going to need it. And you would think like, and we talked about it because we had it, I would come home with stories and I'm like, death does happen at a young age, but it's one of those things like, well, it's not going to happen to me. And even to this day, like I still don't have my will finalized, and I should, and I know it's something that I need to have done. It's just, it's something that like is really hard to just actually do. Mm-hmm. But in terms of like going from 2 income to 1, it was really hard. I was very thankful that Jared started working at a really young age, like 15, and he had so many different jobs. And somebody had mentioned to me, seeing if the kids qualified for any sort of Social Security benefits. I think there are survivor benefits. And so it wasn't something that I had thought about doing. And also life insurance. He had a life insurance plan. It wasn't a big one or anything, but it was enough to allow me to take some leave off of work. So I took 12 weeks off without the fear of like, how am I going to pay these bills? So that was kind of a blessing. I didn't have to worry about going back to work. I could settle, different affairs, accounts, things like that. Cause there's so much paperwork. I don't know how much is involved in losing a parent, but like, I did not realize how much paperwork was involved. And that in of itself was very stressful. And even to this day, like I still have paperwork that I need to fill out and finalize. It's just so overwhelming. And I'm not the type, he was the one that did all of that. And so I'm not good at that. That's not my area. Like I can make us survive, but that's not what I'm good at. So we looked into the survivor benefits, and the kids were able to qualify for a little bit of money, which I've been able to save aside for them for things that they need, that pays for their clothes. Because, they're the ones that need a lot more than I do. I don't need clothes every week or every couple of months. Kids grow so fast that they're constantly needing things. So I've been able to save some of that, but also be able to keep them healthy, fed based off, I was really good at our monthly budget. So I was able just to kind of look and see like, what can we get away with? Like what cable service or whatever. So I basically just looked at it, and I was able to pay off a lot of debts with some of the money that we got. And my salary is enough to kind of keep us comfortable. We're not like swimming in money or anything, but we're okay for now. And I've been very lucky and blessed to be able to keep my job during everything. Obviously nursing is one of those things that's not going away right now. Yeah. So it's been, it was a little bit of a stress situation, but once the dust kind of settled and I was able to look at our monthly finances and say like, okay, we'll be okay on just me alone. And even with the kids not getting, if their benefits didn't come, like we would still be okay. It was just a matter of his money was just extra money that we paid debt with, or that we paid, extra like ballet lessons or stuff like that. So COVID's kind of helped in that situation. Like the kids aren't involved in any extracurriculars currently. And I don't have to pay for extra school care because they're virtual learning. So I'm sure when everything goes back, I'll have to reevaluate again. But as of right now, I've been able to keep us comfortable, keep us afloat with just me alone. I was able to, like I said, to pay off debts. And that was a really big deal because that was where a lot of, stressors came from was, we owed money for this, we owed money for that. And so I've been lucky. Yeah. It was hard though.
Yeah, I bet. Okay, another question. Feel free to not answer if you don't want to. And I hope that this is not an offensive question. Do you ever think about dating?
I do, actually.
I mean, what does that world look like?
It's a scary world. One of the weird things that, again, I don't know where it's going to play into, but the very first thing that my son said when I told him like Dada's gone, and he just kind of looked at me and like sat there for a minute. I'm talking like the day after he died, we were sitting in bed. I just told him I was crying, and he just looked at me. He goes, "Mom," he's like, "Well, I guess you can get a new husband." And I was like crying, continue to cry. And I'm like, "Buddy, like, I don't know if that is going to be in the picture for us. Like, but I appreciate that's where your head's at." So they often ask like, "I want, like, are you going to get like a new husband and blah, blah, blah." I'm like, so yeah, I have thought about it. I've done some of the online dating things, and I don't know. It's scary because I don't want to be taken advantage of. I don't want people to see me like, as like fragile and like, oh, the widow has money, because I don't have money. I have my money, and that keeps us comfortable. Right. So I'm not like wanting anybody to take advantage of us. But I also have 2 kids that grieve their dad. And so they talk about their dad and his pictures all over our house. So it's something that like I have to consider, like, is somebody going to be comfortable walking into that situation? I don't know. I would hope so. But also, like, I'm also grieving the loss of a husband. Like, it's not like we got a divorce and like ended things terribly and we're bitter with each other. Like, I still love my husband. I will probably always love my husband. Our marriage wasn't perfect by any means, but it was, it was something that we were working at every day, that we both had fun with, that we both enjoyed, for the most part. I mean, everyone fights a little bit, but, so yeah, I mean, I would hope that there's somebody out there. And like I said, I have, attempted the online dating. I've gone on a couple of dates and those have been fun and fine. But nothing's kind of stuck. Often, like right now, I'll get on it and I'll just be like, I'm okay being happy. I'm okay being alone, because like I've seen, granted it's just like online, but I've seen that and I'm like, that's not something I'm interested in. It scares me, because I'm also like, I see so many people like, oh, my wife cheated on me or my husband did this. And like so many people have trust issues these days. And like, I was very thankful that like we were very honest and open with our relationship. And I never had to worry about that. And now I feel like I don't know if it's just like my eyes are open to something different. Because the last time I was single was back in 2005, something like that.
Yeah.
So
you're pretty young.
Yeah. I met him when I was 18.
Okay.
Right out of high school.
Yeah. So I guess, yeah, that's I mean, I imagine it's scary.
Yeah. And
another guy.
I don't know. And there's just a lot of like factors. But I would hope that somebody could, accept us and for what we are. I hope that it's out there. COVID again kind of put a damper on things, because it's not like I can go out and pick people up or they can pick me up. And
yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, it's something that I consider. I've gone on, like I said, gone on a couple of dates, and it was fun. It was fine. Just nothing kind of has stuck, and I'm okay with that. And now I've had a lot of time to like reflect, because I feel like I kind of jumped into it pretty early on after he died, because one of the things that I didn't realize that I missed the most was physical touch. Like that's apparently, like, I've realized that was my love language. And so that was something that I immediately craved and immediately missed. And so I think that's kind of why I started dating probably earlier than most people would approve of. But that's also one thing I've learned in grief, is that everyone's different. Everyone has the chance to date when they want, or even think about doing that. Because, some people are like, oh, you haven't even been out a year yet and you're already dating. I'm like, well, it's something that I'm okay with. Like I go to therapy. My kids go to therapy. Like I talk about this. I don't hide. I don't shelter. I don't like, hide or shy away from it. Like if you have a question, ask me, I'm fine with it. And so, yeah, I did kind of start dating a little bit, and I don't regret dating early on. It's just, things happen for a reason. And so far I'm okay. Like, I think it gave me a chance to like really look and be like, okay, Salina, you're fine by yourself. And it's something that I'm actually looking forward to, being like, going on vacations by myself and doing things, I'm okay with it now. And I think that's probably, the biggest hurdle, was being okay with being by myself.
What do you want other people going through this to know? Or what advice could you give them? Or what do you think you could tell them when they're in their darkest moments and they just lost their partner?
I will say what some of the people, some of the like amazing grief community people have told me initially early on, was that, you're going to be okay. Like, and they told me that, and I just could not believe it. I'm like, there's literally no way I could be okay. Like my world is gone. It's done. Like there's rubble and like ash everywhere. Like there's no way I can recover from this. And slowly, if you put in the work, if you just allow yourself to feel the feelings that you're feeling and be okay with them, and just, meet yourself where you're at. So if you're having a bad day, have a bad day. Don't try to like change it. Just like, okay, I am struggling today, and just kind of like sit with that for a minute, as long as you need to. And then, whenever you're ready to come out of it, come out of it. And grief isn't like a linear thing. It's not something that like continues to go. It's all over the place. It will forever be that way. And so I'll be fine for a while, and then something happens, or maybe I'm fine for a while and then I'm not. And I'm okay with that. And so just allow yourself to feel those things, and you're going to be okay. And drinking lots of water, because
I'm going to say alcohol, drinking lots of alcohol. No, water is better
that too, but
no, water is better. Yes.
Only because I remember when he died, like I had the driest mouth for like weeks. I don't know if it was like my adrenaline was going for so long, but like I had cotton mouth, and I felt so bad at the funeral. I was like, my breath probably is so terrible. So I was like chewing so much gum, but I could not get rid of I would drink like 8 of those a day, and it just would not go away. So drinking lots of water, I don't know why. I don't know if it's like the dehydration.
Yeah, I was going to say you're probably dehydrated from just crying.
Yeah. Right? And staying up all night and planning things and whatever. So, but just knowing that you're going to be okay. You'll be okay. Even if you don't feel it right now, as someone who's been there, it will be okay. You'll be okay.
I'm so grateful that we had this conversation, and I'm so thankful that you got to share your story and talk about your life of the party husband, who sounds awesome. And I really appreciate your vulnerability. And I also, when I look at you, I see a very strong woman who's not letting anything get in her way. And I think that's amazing. And I really am happy that you've decided to be vulnerable on the internet, because I know in my heart that you are going to touch and help tons and tons and tons of people. So I wish we could hang out. I wish I could hug you. Where in Texas are you?
I'm in San Antonio.
Okay.
But, my husband and I met in Waco, and then we lived in Dallas for like almost 10 years. So I feel like Dallas is kind of where my heart's at, but San Antonio is where my family is. And I would not be anywhere close to where I am now, emotionally, physically, like without their support, because they've literally come over to my house in the middle of the night when I could not get off the closet floor crying to pick me up. So I owe a lot of that to them.
That's awesome to hear that you have such a close family that's supportive. I love that. Well, if I ever make it to San Antonio, I'm gonna find you, and we're gonna go out to dinner one of these days. Well, I really appreciate you, and I thank you. I'm sure you've got lots of babies to get back to, and hopefully a fun day ahead of you. And this was a really good conversation, and I can't wait for more people to hear you. And are you okay with me putting your Instagram on the screen or anything for other people to potentially reach out?
Sure, absolutely. I love helping people. It's something that I think I'm just so glad for that Instagram grief community. They've been amazing. And I'm glad that you've stumbled upon my profile. Thank you so much for reaching out.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, take care, and I hope our paths cross in real life soon.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.